Continuing off my partner's presentation, I'm going to set up the hypothesis for our test. And our question that we were asking is, did the recession affect the 2008 baseball season? And we want to look specifically at stadium attendance. Did unemployment rates, did housing crashes affect the people buying tickets? And as we know, overall public sentiment was pretty low at this point. And according to the Bureau of Economic Analysts, we actually saw a decrease in consumer spending by over 10%, and it didn't even recover until early 2011. And this should support our hypothesis in theorizing that the market crash and the recession did decrease stadium attendance. Now, the approach on selecting the various teams was pretty simple. At first, we wanted to look at compare big market teams versus small market teams, and these are teams such as San Francisco and New York, located in big cities that might have seen differences in different effects from the recession, as compared to regions such as Tampa Bay and St. Louis, smaller cities by size, yet having various factors of their own. And another thing that we wanted to look at was if these regions were affected differently by the recession, and we can tell that some cities were affected greatly as compared to others. For one, Michigan and Ohio and the West Coast, such as California, were affected greatly by the crash in 2008, and we theorize that these teams might have seen a bigger decrease in stadium attendance. Now, as we look, I separated the 15 teams that we took a look at out of the 30 Major League Baseball teams, and in the Western region, looks to be proving our hypothesis to be true. In 2007 to 2008, we saw double digits up north. The Dodgers were a little bit of a difference here. We'll get to that later. In the southern region, Houston to Atlanta, proved to be looks to be proving our hypothesis to be true, seeing huge decreases in 2008. And then in 2007 to 2008, in the Midwestern region, actually where we thought would see the biggest decreases in stadium attendance, actually was the region that didn't see as much drop as a whole. So Cleveland did see a drop in stadium attendance, but then regions like Detroit saw a 5% increase in stadium attendance. The Eastern region was surprising as well, as we know, New York and Toronto, and Florida particularly, including Miami, saw huge increases in unemployment. Yet the numbers were rather stagnant there. Now, when I plotted the data sets apart, all the charts in blue represent 2007, the red represented 2008, and when we look eye to eye, the West Coast teams do see a decrease, but then we look at the Midwestern region in Milwaukee and St. Louis, and we don't see enough evidence to tell by eye if there was a significant factors that could affect the stadium attendance overall. Now, the teams with the biggest increase and decrease in stadium attendance included the West Coast, as well as some of the Southern teams. And as we go further, I wanted to look at the teams that saw actually increases in stadium attendance, which I thought was pretty surprising, including Michigan, which we talked about before, and Detroit, and the team that surprised me the most was the Milwaukee, because of being located in the Midwest, you would expect it to see greater increases. So, taking these factors into consideration, I decided to go ahead and run the regression. And the factors I took into consideration was stadium attendance and percentage change. And I ended up with the R square value that was pretty low, actually. And as you can tell from the graph, there was no significant correlation that you can tell. So I decided to run a second regression, and this time including stadium attendance and percentage change. In 2007 to 2008, I decided to run unemployment rate as well, and this slightly increased the R square value, but yet again it wasn't significant enough to determine if the recession had affected stadium attendance overall. Now, possible explanations for this, we can look at winning percentages and losing. So teams with winning records tended to drive more traffic to the stadiums, and this allowed teams to go deep into playoffs, which then in case brought more people to the stadium, which could affect stadium attendance overall. And then we looked at another factor we could look at was extreme fandom. So cities such as the Giants and the Yankees have a huge following in baseball. So despite having decreases in consumer spending, these teams were yet seeing increases in stadium attendance. Other factors to consideration was new stadium fever, and this is when a team has renovations. So including the Washington Nationals had a new stadium built. And this is why we saw an increase in stadium attendance from 2007 to 2008. Something to take into consideration is baseball recession-proof. So comparatively, compared to other sports leagues, baseball team tickets are actually cheaper on average. So we hypothesized that we would have seen a decrease. But in actuality, on average, we saw an increase in ticket price, and we also saw an increase in stadium attendance in particular regions. Now, according to this chart by Statistica, we expected consumers to cut back as a result. As you can tell, 62% of consumers said that they were cutting back on spending, which we thought would lead to a decrease in stadium attendance. And from 2007 to 2008, we saw a slight dip in stadium attendance, but it wasn't until after 2008 that we saw significant decreases in stadium attendance. Other factors that we can take into consideration for this might be emergence of other sports leagues. So the NFL, college football are vastly popular with up-and-coming millennial group. And this is something to take into consideration. Another factor to take into account is popularity is declining with baseball fans, and we see an increase in age of the demographics for baseball, not as much as other sports. And this might be an explanation as why we see a decrease in baseball attendance after the recession, and not as totally beginning right as the recession was hitting. So. To conclude, I'd like to say that I do not believe that the recession had a huge impact on overall baseball stadium attendance as a part of our presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it, Professor, and look forward to hearing back from you.